What's up everyone, I'm Jacob, also known as Jonesy, and in this video, I'm going to be going over my first ever nostalgic splits deck, which I called Gated Event Shenanigans. But before I go over the list, if you have not subscribed yet, please hit the subscribe button and hit the bell to be notified every time I put out a new video. So, the most recent webcam tournament in the nostalgix Discord used a new format called Blitz. Nostalgic Splits has two main rule changes from a normal game. The first rule is that on each player's first turn, they start with 10 available mana. The second rule is that during the draw step, if a player starts a turn with less than 5 cards in hand, they draw back up to 5, otherwise, if they have 5 or more, they draw one like normal. It's like a tutorial level is always in play. Lucky for me, I had an idea for a combo deck which I knew would fit perfectly for the Blitz format, and that deck revolved around the Arena Gated event. I'm playing 4 copies of this 4-mana Arena. When it's in play, no evolution fighters can be played by summoning them or by putting them into play from a card effect. But once returned on a player's turn, that player can discard up to 2 level 2 or higher evolution fighters and gain temporary mana equal to half the total cost of the discarded cards. So, if we fill our deck with a lot of very expensive evolution fighters, we'll be able to play a lot of really expensive first evolution fighters. Now for the evolution fighters, we're playing 4 copies of Colossus, 4 copies of Lilith, and 4 copies of Grot Bloom. There's not a ton to say about these because these are the 3 evolution fighters with the highest mana cost. Their abilities, attacks, and health don't really matter because even though we are going to be playing Extra Life, with a gated event in play, we won't actually be able to return these with an Extra Life. However, if we are in a situation where we do have to resurrect one with Extra Life, the best one is probably going to be Lilith, since it does bind 2 fighters on entry. However, even though she does have 18 health, Lilith also has a weakness to Dark-type fighters, which is important because the best fighter in the Blitz format is probably going to be Jelliphant. Jelliphant is one of our 3 first-level fighters which we can actually cast in this deck. Jelliphant is a 9-mana fighter which comes with 13 health, and when it comes into play, deal 3 damage to all other fighters and heroes. It has a 10 damage attack, which can one-shot a Lilith, but it also has a Berserker Rage attack, which just deals 3 damage to everything again, including itself. Because we have 10 mana to use each turn in Blitz, we don't actually need Gated Event to cast Jelliphant. Which means that even if we don't get Gated Event or enough Evolution Fighters to gain extra mana, we'll still be able to play Jelliphant. The next first level fighter we can play is Dubstode. This is a 7-mana fighter with 10 health and 2 armor. It gains +1 attack for each other Dancer in play, which probably won't matter since we are only playing Dubstodes in terms of Dancer fighters. But its best attack is its Borg attack, which deals 3 damage and binds each of your enemy fighters. You can't use it twice in a row, but it's still absolutely going to be worth it to bind all of your enemy fighters. And it also has a 6 damage attack, which is underrated for a 7-mana fighter, but having access to Borg definitely makes up for it. The last fighter we're actually going to be able to play is Fish Out of Water. This is one of my favorite cards. It's a 4-mana fighter with 7 health. It is immune to binding, and there are a lot of binding effects that are going to be used in Blitz. It has a 6 damage attack, and it also has another attack to remove the weakness from one of your fighters and make them also immune to binding. Now, moving on to the spells, we're playing 2 copies of Extra Life. We would play more, but it was restricted at the webcam tournament, and is probably going to be restricted down to 2 copies for most tournaments in the near future. Extra Life is a 6-mana spell which lets you return a fighter from any player's void into play, and if it's a first level fighter, it gains charge. Lucky for us, being able to return a Jelliphant or a Dubstode with charge is going to be very powerful. We're also playing 2 copies of Voidcast, which is also restricted. Voidcast gives us a couple extra chances to play Extra Life from our Void, along with giving us the flexibility of playing other spells from our Void too. Even if we just want to replay a card which costs less than 5 mana, in a normal game of Nostalgix, that would seem like a pretty big cost. However, in Blitz, because we start with so much mana, the extra mana we play to replay one of our cheaper spells from our Void, it won't be as big of a deal as it normally is. Now as for the other spells, we're also playing 4 copies of Energy Drink. This is a 2-mana spell which gives a fighter charge and you draw a card. 10 mana is 1 mana short of playing Jelliphant in an Energy Drink, but we still might be able to do that if we have Gated Event in play. Dubstode, on the other hand, only costs 7, so for only 9 mana, we can play a Dubstode and then play an Energy Drink to give it charge right away. Next up, we're playing 4 copies of Frog of Duality. This is a 3-mana spell, which lets you look at the top 3 cards of your deck. You choose one of them to put into your hand, and put the other 2 onto the bottom of your deck, in any order. Because tutorial levels effect is in play at all times thanks to the blitz rules, I thought it would be better to play a card like Frog of Duality, which gave you better card selection, rather than something like Card of Greed or Reload, which gave you extra cards. Next up, we're playing 4 copies of Divine Wrath. This is an 8-mana spell which voids all fighters in play, and neither player takes price counters, but that's okay. Because we're going to be discarding a lot of cards from gated events, we're going to be drawing extra cards on most turns, and because we do have access to extra life in Voidcast, if we do void one of our key fighters in play, we'll often be able to bring it back. While there are some single target removal spells like Expensive Card, which can handle some of our opponent's board stuff, I felt like Divine Wrath would be the better option in this deck just because it just voids everything. Next up, we're playing 4 copies of Unyeet. This is a 1-mana spell which lets you discard 2 cards from your hand and pick any card from your void and return it to your hand. With the draw rule in effect in Blitz games, the discarding cards is not necessarily a bad thing, because you'll likely just be able to draw new cards as a result of the discard. And since it only costs 1 mana, we can return a Gelfont and play it immediately with our remaining 9 mana. Unyeet is definitely the most flexible return spell, because while there is rewind time does not actually work on fighters or arenas in case we need to return a gated event. The last 2 cards, we're playing 2 copies of Fast Forward. I threw in 2 Fast Forwards, the last 2 slots in the deck, just in case there were times where we wanted to play a Gelfont and an energy drink, both in one turn, without having to rely on gated events. Lastly, for the hero, we're playing Kazira Leiko. With Kazira, once per turn, you can pay 2 mana to give any fighter +1 armor. The webcam tournament had the added restriction that you could only play with Harmonic Surge heroes. I had a tough time deciding between Kazira and King Frigis, but I ended up going with Kazira for a few different reasons. With King Frigis, his Lucky Shield counters only last for 1 turn. With Kazira, the armor lasts until the armor is removed. Also, because we are playing Gelfonts, we are going to be damaging our own heroes too. So I felt like with Kazira, it would be worth it to give one of my fighters armor, then play a Gelfont, and use that 1 armor, take away the 3 damage from a Gelfont either entering or using its Berserker Rage attack. Now moving on to the sideboard. I'm playing 2 copies of Pyroack in the sideboard. This is a 7-mana 9 health fighter, and only has a 4 damage attack, but the most important part about it is its ability. At the end of your turn, Pyroack deals 2 damage to all other fighters and heroes in play. I was worried I would not have enough first level fighters in the main deck, so I wanted to include 2 more in the sideboard. And while I do already have a lot of sweeping capabilities with Gelfont and Dubstode, I felt like I needed 1 more just to make sure I could really shore up my matchup against go-wide strategies. So I went with Pyroack. Now as for the remaining 8 cards in the sideboard, I just went with surprises. I would have ideally liked to play some surprises in the main deck, but because the gated event combo required you to play a lot of specific cards in the main deck, I did not have a lot of flex spots. But I still put them in the sideboard just to board them in case I needed them. I ended up going with 4 copies of Nope. I'm also playing 2 copies of Reverse to stop other surprises, and 2 copies of Save the Day, which can counter and negate a fighter. I was not super worried about my opponent's fighters because we are playing 2 of the best first level fighters in the game with Gelfont and Dubstode, but there are some fighters which can really slow us down, mainly Destructa. So Save the Day is in there mostly just to stop Destructa decks. Now I'm going to be uploading 3 different match videos with this deck. The first 2 were games played in the tournament. The last one was a playtest game against Elusive with a Gamatron deck. And while I won't spoil the results about the deck, I will go over a couple changes that I would recommend. First off, Fast Forward is definitely not needed in the deck. In most cases, I just discarded it from an Unyeet, or I end up mulliganing it down to the bottom from my opening hand because I really did not think it was worth playing. In its place, I would definitely play Dancing Shoes. It's a 1-mana equipment which makes an equipped fighter or hero immune to binding. And just playing Fish Out of Waters is not going to be able to handle all the binding effects that your opponent can have. And speaking of Fish Out of Water, while it was a solid card for the deck, I don't know if 4 copies are necessarily needed. I would probably go down to 2 copies, which would free up 2 more spaces for surprises. I would probably just main deck 2 reverses, just to worry about your opponent's surprises, but there are definitely some other very good surprise options as well. Now as for the hero goes, Kazira was good in the deck, and the next time we play the Blitz format, I definitely will consider playing her again, but if they remove the restriction of only using Harmonic Surge heroes, the base set gives a very interesting option, and that option is Dr. Corvus. Once per turn, you can pay mana equal to the mana cost of a fighter and let the fighter attack a second time. One of the struggles with this deck is that you often had a lot of extra mana from gated events. And with Dr. Corvus, even though we are playing a lot of expensive first level fighters, I still think it might be worth it just to get extra attacks out of it. I think it will especially be worth it if we have a Dubstone in play, because Dubstone's Brig attack, you can't use it twice in a row, but you can use it 2 turns in a row if you attack with your Brig and then use Dr. Corvus to use its other attack. Now I did announce in a previous video, I was going to be making a second deck tech video for a normal game of nostalgix, in case you didn't want to only play this in Blitz. However, after playing the deck, I honestly don't think a deck like this will work in a normal game of nostalgix. Since we don't have tutorial levels effect in play at all times, we're going to have to play a lot of draw spells ourselves in order to refill our hand. We could just play tutorial level ourselves, so after we play a gated event and discard a bunch of cards and play a really expensive fighter, we can just play tutorial level, which will remove the gated event, but it will let us draw extra cards, and we can always just play an extra copy of gated events. We are going to need to play cheaper cards too, so alternate timeline would definitely be a must play in the deck, since it is great card filtering for only 1 mana. Massive Effect is also a consideration, since it does let you draw 3 cards, and discarding 2 is not necessarily bad since we are playing with extra life. Another great draw spell to play is Reload. For only 4 mana, it lets you draw up to 6 cards in hand. However, you can see the inherent problem with this deck. It's that in order to actually use the combo, you need to be playing a lot of specific cards, which does not leave a lot of wiggle room in terms of the spells and support cards in the deck. And because this deck does not actually have a lot of early game interaction that can actually affect the board, you might also be forced to play some cards like Change the Deep or Dance Fatigue in order to survive until you play gated events. And even in my Blitz games, I had a lot of very awkward and clunky hands with a bunch of really expensive fighters which were just sitting in my hand not doing anything, since I either didn't have a second one or I didn't have a gated event. While this deck still might be good in a normal game and you might be able to make it work, it is going to require a lot of playtesting just to find the right ratio of discard cards for gated events, big fighters to cast through a gated event, and draw spells and early interaction. So that is Gated Event Shenanigans. What do you think of the deck? Let me know in the comments down below. Thanks so much for watching everyone, and I will see you in the next video.